Okay, just wanted to double check the audio was coming through on that, and it looks like we're good to go. So we just talked about lockdown. I'm going to go to the next one, which is a lockout. It's similar to our lockdown situation. The difference is we are concerned about a threat outside the school. So, Dr. Brian, here recently, we actually had there was a shooting that happened at a, um, at a market basket, a store not far from us, and so we were considering locking out our campus. What we'd been worried about is that someone would have been out, kind of a threat near our campus on the outside, and so we'd want to get all of our students in. So what kind of things do we coach our teachers to do for a lockout?
Of course, if you got anybody outside, you want to make sure that they get in, and it's very important that teachers are able to be reached at all times, so that way you can, if you have kids out on a football field, or say they're running on the track, or they're outside after lunch, of course, with this whole COVID-19 situation, outside is always a good thing right now if you can possibly do it. And so, of course, if you offer a lockout, you want to make sure that you're basically securing your perimeter of your building. And so you want to make sure that everybody's inside. It's business as usual. But once you get everybody inside the building, then you can secure all the exterior doors and ensure that nobody goes outside until an all clear is called. In those kind of situations, like you were saying, working with law enforcement like I have in the past, if you have a scenario like that where you have a person that's nearby, say they're up against the wall and, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory, a school is unfortunately a good place to go out, as far as making a splash. And if they've got nothing else to lose, unfortunately, it's the heart of our community that takes the brunt of that. So a lockout is something that you move into as quick as possible, get everybody inside, secure the building down until you get an all clear from, the police that are handling that, or whatever reason that we're locking out. And they notify us for an all clear, and then we can go back to it. It's not as quite as intense as a lockdown situation, but it is something that, we got to, of course, take serious. There's a reason why we're getting all those kids inside, and that's for their own safety.
Okay. Yeah. I like what you said about law enforcement, because as I continue to do my job, I realize more and more how often I have to, refer to them because they're the experts, especially in times of emergency. So that's something I'll definitely include in our little training tool. That way, teachers know that I'm not the one making the calls. Our administrator on campus isn't necessarily making the calls. It's, local law enforcement who have more eyes on the situation. So
for sure, and of course, it's always one of those things where it's a coordinated effort, where you want to work together and make sure that you're doing right. Ultimately, it's our job to keep every person in that building safe.
Right.
And sometimes you rely on the resources that you have, and whenever it comes to a situation like that, emergency management, local law enforcement, there are go-to people.
Okay, good, got that too. Okay, that's going to bring us to one that's also kind of similar to a lockdown and a lockout, which is a hold. A hold really for us is going to be where we're trying to keep people in place, where they are. So this was a kind of a different threat where, maybe we have identified a threat within our schools. And by allowing students to transition or to, change their setting, then we're actually allowing that threat to move or whatnot. So this is one that is a little bit unique. What do you do? How do you coach your teachers through this?
Really, sometimes we just simplicity at its finest. We call it a hold. Sometimes you hear a hold in place, or whatnot. But hold means hold. It just means we don't. I know that it may cause some kind of inconvenience or whatnot, and of course things happen. But when you call a hold, I just need everybody to stay in the same place. If there's a transition coming, of course, on our 2 campuses, we have 9 class periods a day for our kids to go through and rotate. But in a hold situation, they would maintain and hold in whatever class they're in, or whatever location they're at, without moving.
Gotcha. And so there would be small instances like that. I mean, the funny thing about this, I guess it's not funny, but it's very real right now, is, a situation where a hold might be necessary is if we were to be aware of maybe like a COVID case on our campus. Maybe it was something serious where we didn't want to risk transitioning from one classroom to another. So we're not locking down, we're not locking out. This isn't a law enforcement deal, but we do know that by allowing students to transition, we're increasing the risk of further spread. So
correct, and that's a great point. It's more of a local thing, in a COVID situation with trying to worry about close contact. If say you're notified of a kid that does have showing symptoms, or parents get with us, hey, we sent him thinking that everything was cool, but he actually tested positive. You could call that hold and then have them stay. Of course, you can holds on what you want. So, like, you could do a campus-wide hold. You could just call the teachers and say, hey, in this hallway or in this specific classroom, we're going to hold, or whatnot. So that's a great example of a simple, we need to keep the kids in place, so that way, we don't move into transition. And of course, based off of guidelines, the transition itself wouldn't be an issue in that kind of scenario. But then that kid is going to then transition to the next period where they could risk the potential of being within 6 feet of those kids without a mitigating factor and causing additional quarantining issues.
Right. Okay, good. I love the use of mitigating factor. That's become the coin term, huh?
Yeah, it's the mitigating factors, yes.
So, yeah. All right, the next one we've got is, there's 2 of this type. It's a shelter in place. One of them is hazmat, which also kind of hits home for us recently. Recently our campus, there was an explosion of a plant nearby our campus. And so luckily we weren't in school. But since then, we've talked about, what happens if we are in school when that happens? And so a shelter-in-place hazmat would be called. What are the key points on that?
So shelter-in-place with a hazmat, one thing that we're fortunate enough to have is our 2 campuses have an emergency button. And what that button does is whenever you hit it, it shuts off the ventilation system. So if we were notified, and we have a great rapport with we have multiple refineries in our area. They surround our schools, and we try to be partners with them in all kinds of different endeavors, and they do keep us in the loop. We're not caught off guard on these things. For example, we had a sulfur release happen just yesterday at one of the local refineries, and they were immediately emailing the district, letting us know, what was affected, what they were doing, what caused it, how they were remedying that. And so there wasn't a need for a hazmat shelter in place. But basically you want to make sure, kind of like the lockout, you get everybody that's outdoors, indoors. And then, if you need to, you can use the button to shut down the ventilation system. Of course, that's not something that the teachers have to do. That's something that's housed in the centralized office complex, and so we could shut down that if we needed to. And then basically everybody stays inside, and depending on how serious it is, whether or not you would need to keep them inside of that room or not. But I mean, all be all, in most of these situations, if not all of them, it's about being able to account for students and making sure that they're safe and in a place, as opposed to roaming around. And you know what, I'm not too happy about this, so I'm going to sneak out the back door or something, and then, they end up getting seriously hurt because of something floating around in the air that they can't see.
Right. Yeah, that's good too. Account for all students. That's a big thing for all of these drills. I wrote that down. The next one was shelter in place due to weather. we are very fortunate to. I think our district does a really great job of keeping an eye on weather. Being a district so close to the coast. We've had just here recently a couple times where we haven't been in school because of the weather. So I think that's a benefit because we're a little bit more sensitive to it. But we do have a shelter in place due to weather. In this instance, I think it's more so designed maybe towards tornado or violent windstorms where you have to worry about things crashing through windows or something of that case. So here, obviously, the ventilation system wouldn't be a consideration. What kind of things would we be worried about?
Well, that's something that luckily in this area we have. We're prone to hurricanes, so you typically get a little bit of a heads up. In my years in education, I think there's been one that I can think of. I think that it was Hurricane Umberto, and they just popped up overnight. It was like a tropical depression, and then all of a sudden it was a Category 2 hurricane by the time we woke up. And so it was just one of those, but typically they don't catch you off guard. You kind of have an idea of what you're doing, but these kind of shelter in place, like you said, would be, typical of a place like a tornado. And of course, with it being 2020, I'm not ruling these things out.
Right.
Because anything can happen in 2020.
Yeah.
But, of course you want to make sure that people are away from windows if possible. If there would be a need, for them to shelter in their desk or, for them to move into some sort of interior room that doesn't have a window if it's safe to do, that kind of thing. Basically just be aware of the situations and listen up for any kind of change that needs to happen. If a tornado were to come through and it were to start messing around with some sort of the structure, which based off of, like you said a little bit ago with the refinery explosion, as close as it was, I mean, it would take a pretty strong thing to really rock these buildings because they've been, they've kind of been battle tested at this point.
Yeah.
Of course, just like I said, stay away from the windows. Shelter under desk or in a place that doesn't have a window if you need to. It all just depends on the scenario itself.
Okay, good. That brings us to our last one. It's a fire drill. This is one that we drill all the time. It seems like every time I bat my eye, it's time for another fire drill. So, I can definitely talk to this one a little bit we have in each room a map for our teachers, and this is to show them, where they're supposed to go on a fire drill, where their nearest exits are, what the flow of the students should be. You said earlier, you have all 700 walking in the same direction. I think that's kind of the best way for me to sum up kind of what we expect in our fire drills. One thing I think our district does a great job of is we also drill for a fire if we had an obstruction. And so that's like, hey, yes, we have a fire, but maybe this hall has collapsed. So your typical fire drill exit route is blocked off. Now what do you do? I think that's a good thing that we install. Is there anything else that you think needs to be considered as far as fire drills go?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's one of those things. The frequency of fire drill. At times it can be agitating. Just because you are losing instructional time. But the more important part is that you don't want to lose someone's life, because they're confused or they're not sure where to go or something like that. Or if you run it enough. Then if you have a sub, the kids really can tell the sub where to go, or you're all kind of, like you said, you're heading out a specific way because typically those highways exit in the same fashion, assuming that you don't have some kind of block. But, of course, in a non-instructional period like a study hall, which our two campuses have, you would like to try to schedule them all in there. And it's, I understand the premise, but switching it up and doing an unannounced fire drill, or doing it in a time of day that isn't typical or whatnot. So that way, it keeps people on their toes. So that way they're not running the exact same thing every single time. Because of course you don't want to. There's a certain difference between muscle memory, so to speak, where you're running through a motion that you've practiced, and then, okay, well, I only go down this hall and I only go out this door. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a dangerous scenario as well. So that's why kind of mixing it up and doing it at different times during the day is always helpful.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's that'll be something that we'll have to implement, and I'm sure will go great unannounced and at a different time.
I don't like those unannounced, especially if you run a fire drill like an alarm panel where it's actually squawking.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, we ran one whenever I was the assistant principal on your campus, and we did an unannounced, and they weren't too happy about it. All in all, just not from a standpoint of anything other than it just scared the mess out of them. It wasn't announced; they weren't bracing themselves for it.
Right.
But in the end, when we went back and we looked at the camera footage, we did not tell anybody. We had 650 kids or so coming off of, or hearing the alarm. The teachers fell right into place, did exactly what they had been doing all along with drills, rallied the kids, and got all 700 plus people out of the building in 1 minute and 7 seconds.
Yeah.
So, that's why we do these drills, is so that way we can efficiently and effectively get people out of harm's way into safety.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we've talked about it a little bit. I've got 2 more questions for you. Number 1, how do you train it? You talked about reviewing these drills at the beginning. We've talked about doing them unannounced, changing them up with obstructions, do them at different times. Anything else that you think is key to making sure that when we train it, it's something that's digestible but also applicable?
Well, yeah, I think that putting teachers in a scenario, is always more effective than just telling them. So, if you have, especially new people, new staff coming aboard, and you want to actually run through that with them, that's not a bad thing to do, because I found in the past that, people at times will save a little faith. And, I understand what you're talking about. Well, then whenever push comes to shove, they have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. And it could be, I don't think that they're doing it with some kind of malintent. But, around your colleagues, of course, you want to look sharp. And so sometimes you're just going to agree to something with not actually knowing what's going on. Or, like I said, I'm not big about using jargon, especially in these drills, because you need to have, if there's an active shooter situation, you want to come on the loudspeaker and you want to say there is an active shooter currently in the building. Like, we have a code Ryan. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody knows what that means. Yeah. You need to be very direct and very specific and everything. So, and as far as the training's going, hey, we're gonna tell you what these things are. We're gonna be running this kind of drill later on, so that way you can see it or whatnot, just without the kids. So it may not be a bad thing that they can actually go through the motions themselves without having to worry about the kids. So that way they can see it from the kids' perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because we haven't done one, obviously we didn't do one without the kids. And that would probably be a good way for people to learn, because then there's room for error there. There's no one, we don't got 650 eyes on our teachers as they're trying to navigate a situation for the first time. The other thing I was going to ask you is just any special considerations, which you really did a good job going through it all as we talked. I'm going to go through some of the things that I've kind of picked up on. All speak the same language, codes lead to confusion, have all students walking in the same direction, is our principle, kind of what we're going for. This is a coordinated effort. There are resources in play for us. And then a big thing for us is we want to account for students. Is there anything, maybe any tidbit you'd add to that, or do you feel like that's a pretty good summation of what our goals are?
Well, I think that's a really good, hit on the mark. But, of course, we have, resource officers that work every day. And, I like to pick their brain. So, if we have people that are coming in that are those experts, like you said a while ago, hey, this is what we're doing. Is this something right, or is this something wrong? Another thing that we don't actually see hands-on, but our district resource officer, he actually goes through and does a safety audit every year where he sees what's right, what's wrong, what we need to tweak, because sometimes are you doing it because, and it's something that I've come up with, come across in my principalship is, are we doing it because it's the right thing to do, or are we doing it because it's the way that it's always been done?
Right.
And that's a hard thing that when we get used to something, get in a groove, that we don't want to change it. But is it the right thing to do? So that's why it's important to review and audit your processes frequently, so that way you can see, is there a more efficient way to do it? Is this something that needs to be done? Do we need to practice more? Do we need to practice less? Or are we going about it all the wrong way? And those people that do that every day for a living, those people are the ones that can guide us on it and say, hey, look, in these fire drills, you really need to worry about this. Or in a hazmat situation, you really need to worry about that. That kind of thing. So, using those resources, that's why we build a relationship with those departments outside of education, so that way we can come back and use those when we need them and pick their brain and get their opinion on something, because they're the experts.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm figuring out as I do this job, and something that I talked to our superintendent about recently was, and he's a great superintendent. We just extended his contract because he's fantastic at what he does, but he'll be the first to tell you he doesn't know it all, and he can't know it all. Nobody ever will. You're going to be weak in some areas. You got to rely on people who are better at certain things than you are. So I think that's a great mentality to have as a team of administrators. And so why not, model that, if nothing else, for our teachers in these drills.
For sure.
Okay. Well, Dr. Brian, that is basically it. That's all I wanted to go. We've covered lockdown, lockout, shelter in place for hazmat, shelter in place for weather, hold drills, fire drills. We've talked about how we're going to train our staff and the special considerations. My goal from here is I'm actually going to be conducting a safety meeting next week with our campus. I know that you guys will be doing this the same. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to be taking our thoughts, your perspective and my own. I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to create a tool that for administrators, we can send out, basically like, here's a pre-made email that we'll send out. We're going to have a lockout drill. Here's the email. This is what we expect from our teachers, and just kind of all those considerations. And so there's a document, like a living document, that you can change as needed, but you can use as an administrator. And the other part of it I want to create is a document that's just kind of like a flip book for our teachers, where they have, the 7 drills that we do. This is what you do in those situations, and this is what you need to be cognizant of. And then on top of that, one final document probably that just, again, for administrators, just for this is how we want to train. These are your resources and special considerations. So that's the end goal of all this. I appreciate you letting me pick your brain on it. And I think that between the two of us, we'll be able to come up with a document that for sure our 2 campuses can use, and possibly even the district as a whole.
For sure. And I know that this is something that you and I have talked about before working together, but, of course, in some of these drills, some of these exercises, there are certain details that, of course, we don't publicize because, if we do go into, say, like an active shooter situation, you don't want all of the students knowing exactly where, are we going to evacuate the building? Are we going to go to this location? Are we going to go there? Because then you kind of set yourself up for a sit and duck situation, which is a terrible, possibility. And that kind of brought us to that, the shooter situation that happened in, I think it was Florida a few years back, where the kid pulled the fire alarm.
Right.
And then made sure that the hallways came out. Well, he knew that kind of situation was going to set him up for for what his end goal is. So, of course, part of the training that we need to make sure is included is that, in situations like that, we don't want to disclose all of the information because typically it's either a student or a former student that poses that kind of threat. So if they know all of the plan, then that could lead to other problems as well.
Yeah. And not to go on too much of a tangent, but I actually remember when I was getting my degree in education talking about this and what you do for a shooting, and they used maybe Harvard or some other university as an example, and they had said that the student knew which door would be, like, what class would go in what order. And so he literally went in that order to each classroom, and the only classrooms that they didn't have multiple casualties was the classroom that actually went away from the typical plan and busted a window out, and rather than using their fire exit, they jumped out of the window. So, there's definitely some gray areas that teachers are going to have to become problem solvers in the moment. So that's definitely something that, after you saying that, prompts me to add that into my instruction, into our training.
Yeah, and of course, you want not to keep them in the dark. There are certain things that that law enforcement discloses to us that we don't let out to anybody. But you want the teachers to know, but you also want them to know in their training that we just don't notify the students about these specific details.
Right.
And so that way they're aware of it, because, like we said, confusion leads to casualties. And you don't want that. So you want the teachers to be aware of it, so that way they can get the kids in the right situation. But then you don't want to pass it along to the students in case they are a potential threat themselves.
Yep. Okay. Those are good points. I feel good about this. I'm going to go ahead and close out this video. But Dr. Bryan, I appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you. It was really nice of you to include me in on it. I'm glad to work with you any way that I can. I'm glad to help any way that I can.
Yeah, well, I look forward to building this together, and maybe we give something the district as a whole can use.
For sure, for sure.
All right.